This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am, in fact, Kevin Randle. While we're waiting for the guest, I've got a couple of things to chat about. Normally, I would call these rants, but I don't really think of them as rants. They're more as sort of a enthusiastic dialogue, maybe, something like that. But there's an awful lot of things going on in the world of the UFO that somewhat annoying. And I publish information about this on my blog periodically as well. Lou Alexandro, he of the ATIP program and burst on the ufological stage a couple of years ago, wrote that he wanted to kill ufology. He wanted to get rid of it. He thought it should be burned to the ground and started over. He didn't like the way it was operating. He had too many people infighting, too many people in it for the money, all these kinds of aggravations. We weren't using the scientific method. I put a response on my blog about this saying, you know, he hasn't been around that long. He hasn't looked at the history. And there's been good science done in the field of ufology by the private UFO researchers. And the problem really wasn't us. It was on the other side of the coin. It was the government interfering with our discussions and interfering with our investigations and putting out basically propaganda. But there's nothing to the UFO field that was important. We had the Condon Committee, which I know you've heard me talk about a number of times, which was this Air Force sponsored study to the tune of $500,000 to the University of Colorado. Before a word was written, before the contract was signed, before an investigation took place, the conclusions were given to the Condon Committee by the Air Force, and the documentation is there to prove this. And I've alluded to it on my blog, and I think I've even got a copy of the Hippler letter on my blog. Hippler was an Air Force officer, lieutenant colonel at the time, and he wrote to Dr. Robert Lowe of the Condon Committee. He says, here's what we'd like you to find. We'd like you to say that the Air Force has done a good job of investigating UFOs. We would like you to find that there is nothing of scientific value to be learned by further investigation of UFOs. And there are no national security implications. Well, we now know that all of that is wrong because we have new investigations going on and it sort of negates all of that. But the point is the conclusions were written prior to the investigation began. And when the investigation ended, that is exactly what they found. Even though one of the investigators on the Condon Committee was denied permission or denied information because of national security. The guy had a security clearance and he was at Malmstrom Air Force Base, to investigate the sightings around Belt, Montana, knew about the problem with the missile field, one of the flights going offline, and asked about it. And he said, I can't tell you about that. That's a matter of national security. And he was surprised that he knew about it. And all this is documented in one of my books as well. But the real point is, so they knew there was national security implications. The national security implication is, of course, if you can disable the missiles from outside the launch complexes, then you can destroy our retaliatory capability long before it's necessary to employ it. In other words, you could launch an attack against us and we couldn't do a thing about it to respond. So there was a national security implication there. And the Condon Committee says there are no national security implications. The other thing is an Air Force mission is to investigate intruders into our airspace. And these could be airliners off course. It could be private planes that are off course. It could be any number of things. And in fact, the Soviets, and I use the term Soviets purposely here, invaded our airspace a number of times. And there's pictures of Soviet bombers being escorted by Air Force fighters over parts of the continental United States. So there are national security implications to the UFO phenomenon like that. So that kind of negated this idea that he was saying that there was nothing to be learned. Alessandro was saying, well, there is problems with the investigation. Well, here was the Air Force and a university interfering with the course of investigations for UFOs, saying there's nothing to it and kind of belittling the civilian investigations. The other thing that's interesting, and APRO had a list of scientific consultants. I think NICAP had one as well. I think NICAP may have called it something else. But they both had long lists of trained scientists, PhD scientists, working scientists who were consultants or advisors or conducted investigations for them into the UFO phenomenon. And I think, it's important to realize that an awful lot of the people doing the investigations were scientifically trained. On the other hand, a number of the investigators were also military trained. I being one of them, I had a training in various aspects of intelligence work. So I could bring that to the table as well. So the idea that the whole UFO field should be burned to the ground was just, to me, ludicrous to begin with. So, like I said, I responded to that. He was concerned about the infighting and how we would get into these little battles with one another over the information that we were publishing. You can point to Stan Friedman and me, for example, as having one of those conflicts. But science is filled with those. They often have conflicting views, and they often come to nearly blows over those conflicts. And you think of the dinosaur wars at the turn of the last century, where the two fellows from Eastern universities, and for some reason their names escape me. I keep thinking of something else, but they were battling one another, who had the best fossils, who had the best insight to how the dinosaurs lived, and all of that sort of thing. And they would blow up with dynamite the fossil beds of their opponent and things like that. And I'm thinking, there's nothing like that in ufology. Yeah, we argue these points, but I think that's also part of the process of science. We do not do science by consensus. If I have an opinion and my opinion happens to be right, and the entire scientific community is lined up against me, saying I'm wrong, and yet what I have is correct, then the consensus doesn't matter. And that's where we are in the UFO field, I think. We have to take a look at all of that sort of thing. So when we look at the Roswell case specifically, and there's been an awful lot of conflict about that, I am at loggerheads with a number of my colleagues on various aspects of this. And I'm not saying I'm right in this case or they're wrong. I'm just saying that we have a disagreement on the importance of specific witnesses, specific information. Tom Carey and I kind of talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Glenn Dennis and the missing nurse story. I am convinced Glenn Dennis made the whole thing up, and it's completely and totally bogus. There's nothing to it, and we should eliminate it from our discussion. And in fact, it should be relegated to a footnote, because we need to acknowledge the problem, but we also need to say this is the outcome of that problem. But we don't have we don't have to come to blows about it. We just need to acknowledge it. And I look at the Glenn Dennis tale as completely and totally bogus. Tom thinks there may be some aspects of it, and he talked to a nurse involved with a civilian doctor who may have had a security clearance, and he brings her along to the base to see the bodies. And I'm just saying, no, that's not the way it would have happened, especially when you're dealing with something that becomes highly classified. It just doesn't work that way. So the point really is, I think that he was off base. The other thing that he said that really annoyed me was that many of us were just in it for the money. And I'm thinking of, if I was wanting to write books to make money, and I do write books to make money, I think of the Vietnam Ground Zero series, for example, which Bob Cornett and I had done in the 1980s. We did it because we wanted to tell the stories, we wanted to be writers, and we needed to make an income. And I cannot see how making an income devalues your work. It's something that's always there. But to dismiss the work by saying, well, you're just in it for the money is not to deal with the problem, not to deal with the information, not to deal with where things are going, but it's a way of being dismissive without having to deal with the information. So I say a specific case is wrong, or let's change that. A specific case is very good, very, very important. And people say the Levelland case, let's say the Levelland case is very important because of the number of witnesses and what took place. So I say it's an important case. And the opponents say, well, no, not really, and you're just in it for the money. They haven't explained what happened in Levelland. They haven't explained anything going on around it, but they have been dismissive by suggesting that maybe my investigation was motivated by money. And oftentimes in the UFO cases, I find myself getting drawn into them, not because of the potential for publishing them or going on the lecture circuit or anything like that. It's because I find them interesting. I've often said what I should do is put on my Air Force uniform or my Army uniform, my lieutenant colonel suit, go over to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, stand in front of one of the hangars and put together a short video saying, yeah, I just came from inside and I saw the alien creatures. What's the big deal here? And now suddenly I'm an insider. I've seen the bodies. I've been to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It would be untrue, of course. But I could say that, and you really couldn't prove that it was untrue because there I am standing in my uniform in front of the hangar. But I don't do that because my motivation is not monetary. It is to get at the truth. And I think that's an important thing for us to take a look at. When we come back in just a moment, and I say we, by that I mean me, when I come back and hope my guest will be around, we'll talk about some other aspects of the UFO field and see where it's going. So stick around. We'll be right back. And I am back. Still waiting for those of you who are interested. Kind of addressing the problem that Alessandro was talking about, I will just say this briefly. I did a book called Project Moondust a long time ago, and an editor asked me to update it. And Brad Sparks said that there was no Project Moondust. I said, I got documents for Project Moondust. And what happened was we learned that Moondust may have been a code word for a project. And if there was something going on with that required Moondust, which was an investigation of UFOs, that the local area would appoint a project officer. There was no headquarters or something like that. So we'll kind of explains how some of these things work and how we can have a dialogue amongst ourselves that may seem acrimonious, but it's actually just kind of finalizing information. I am interested in the cattle mutilations off and on, simply because it's something I got involved with in the 1970s. Chris O'Brien, who's joining me here, is probably much more interested in cattle mutilations than I am. I will tell you that from 1992 to 2002, Christopher O'Brien investigated over 1,000 paranormal events reported in the San Luis Valley, which is in Colorado, or north central New Mexico. I should have read my notes better that way. Working with law enforcement officials, ex-military ranchers, and an extensive network of skywatchers, he documented what may have been the most intensive wave of unexplained activity ever seen in a single region of North America. His 10-year investigation resulted in 3 books of his Mysterious Valley trilogy, The Mysterious Valley, Enter the Valley, and Secrets of the Mysterious Valley. His meticulous field investigation of UFO reports, unexplained livestock deaths, haunted sites, Native American legends, hey, I always like those, cryptozoology, secret military activity, and folklore found in the world's largest alpine valley, has produced one of the largest databases of unusual occurrences gathered from a single geographical region. He is currently working with a team of specialists installing a high-tech video surveillance and hard data monitoring system in and around the St. Louis Valley. Are you linked in with the Madar with Fran Ridge or anything, Chris?
Oh,
sorry, I threw that in there in the middle of the introduction. Sorry.
Well, that's all right. I've talked with friends, people. We never actually figured out a way to incorporate my project in his project. So we're kind of operating on our own separate paths right now. But I think it would be a great idea. One of the things that we are accomplishing is we have radio frequency spectrum analyzers and accelerometers, magnetometers, which would dovetail nicely with Fran's project.
Okay. Well, let me finish here. The last paragraph is his book, Stalking the Herd, which he kindly sent to me. Published by Adventures Unlimited Press, is being called the most important book ever written examining our relationship with cattle and how this is manifested in the modern cattle mutilation mystery. Well, Chris, I think you know I'm sort of on the other side of the fence on the cattle mutilations.
Last time we talked, that was 2005, if I remember.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah, except for a couple of appearances on the Paracast, of course, that I was a co-host with. But yeah, we've really kind of been ships navigating our kind of separate paths in the ocean here.
Well, and I'm sure you're aware of this. I was invited to investigate some cattle mutilations in Minnesota by Jim Lorenzen back in the 1970s.
Right.
And I hesitate to say that because it certainly makes me old. But the investigations that I conducted with Bob Cornett, who was a good friend of mine, didn't pan out. I mean, there was nothing mysterious when we got up there and began to examine what was going on in this specific incident. And the investigations I've conducted since then, that really didn't lead me into a suggestion that there was anything mysterious going on. What led you to the other side of the fence?
Just a sheer number of reported cases that occurred in my neighborhood, starting in 1992 and then going through 2002. I got a real quick lesson how to be, how would I say this, to be skeptical really about what I was looking at. And out of around 200 cases that I went out on, the vast majority of them appeared to be mysterious appearing, just scavenger damage. And I've talked with Ian and what was his name? The guy that the main writer of Mute Evidence.
Ian Summer and Kagan. Kagan and
yeah,
Summer.
Yeah, Dan Kagan. Yeah. I talked to them, and very early on, of course, I spoke with Linda Howe and Tom Adams and Gary Massey and others early on, and I was very, very fortunate to be immediately, within less than a month, brought up to speed on what I was dealing with when, I was getting these reports from sheriffs and others in the San Luis Valley that animals were being targeted and found mutilated. Well, out of the 200 cases that I personally have gone out on, only 40, which is what, 20%. 20% of those deserved attention, featured, they featured damage that you can't explain. Like my number one thing that I looked for when I went out was cut hair follicles. If you find an animal that appears to have, some sort of surgical precision, I love that one because it's not necessarily so. And however, if there's cut hair follicles, no maggot swarm, no birds, no coyotes, nothing in nature is going to be responsible for cut hair follicles. That's done with an instrument by something or someone with intelligence. Now, I people say, "Oh, you think it must be aliens, right?" No, no, aliens are the least likely possibility, I think, for the types of things that we've been able to demonstrate and like the NIDS folks back in the
Well,
late.
let me interrupt here, because
Okay.
this was something that I got from reading Stalking the Herd. Was I got the impression that you weren't a big advocate of aliens
No.
mutilating the cattle,
No.
that it's a terrestrially based force of some kind. And I'm just making sure I've got that correct. That's what you were saying just now.
I think out of those 200 cases, 40 were high strange, in that they appeared to be perpetrated with intelligence. They featured elements that you can't explain away with a natural predator scavenger scenario. And out of those, there were about 7 or 8 of them that I feel have some sort of strange paranormal culprit involved. Probably the same culprit that has been reported taking livestock and mutilating them, that goes all the way back probably into prehistory. It may even be one of the things that have prompted humans to sacrifice, their sick and animals and it to the gods, so that they don't come down and grab the good ones. So,
Well, I know I reached out to you because I had come across this notation about the cattle mutilation going back into history, and there was something about a mutilation in England of sheep in 1609, and
1606. Yep.
I wanted to know where that had come from, and you provided me with the source material.
Right.
But the one thing I didn't quite get, I've got just a minute or so here before we need to take a break. The one thing I didn't understand is, would these be the kind of mutilations we see today? I mean, they don't seem to be connected, other than there were deaths of cattle and only certain things were taken.
Yeah, of this sundry conjectures, but most would agreeth, it tendeth toward fireworks. I love the last line of that particular entry into the court records of James II. Or is it James I? I get all my Charles, James, and Edwards mixed up sometimes. So, well, I mean, there's many examples down through history. Charles Fort was able to dig up some pretty interesting reports from the 1800s, for instance, and we do know that there was a rash of these types of cases in the 1920s in Australia. So, having not been there and not seen any, lab reports or pathology, descriptions of animal pathologists, it's very difficult to tell. But we'll hit all this when we get back.
Yeah, we'll get this when we get back. Your website is ourstrangeplanet.com, ourstrangeplanet, all one word, all lowercase.com, and you can take a look at what he has to say about this. The book, the latest book is Stalking the Herd, which I find kind of interesting, even though I don't really subscribe to everything, and we'll talk about that in a moment. My latest book, of course, is Understanding Roswell, for those of you who want to get sucked into that minutia once again. It tells you what you need to know about the Roswell case. We will be back right after this with Chris O'Brien talking about cattle mutilations. And we are back. Sorry, I was looking at my notes. I have to pay attention to the little bars crawling across the bottom of the screen there when we're away. We were talking about kind of the history of cattle mutilations, and I noticed in Stalking the Herd you referenced the Leroy, Kansas, Alexander Hamilton mutilation.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd bring that up.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that then, and then we'll argue about it.
Well, obviously, when you're like you, I'm a real digger, and I love to follow footnotes and see where they lead me. And for for years, I had thought that Jerry Clark had done a good job debunking the whole Alexander Hamilton mutilation case, which occurred in Yates Center, Kansas, I think in 1897. And the more I dug, the more I realized that old Jerry was wrong. And I don't mind pointing that out. In fact, I found that he bent over backwards to debunk what may have been a real case. And of course, not being alive in 1897 and not being, a person that was interested in reporting this type of thing, I really don't know what else to say except that Jerry took an offhand, snide remark by Hamilton and spun it into a scenario where he was part of a liars club and was just pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. But
Let
in
me,
fact,
let me,
hold on, 12 citizens in his community, all the bankers, the lawyers, they all signed affidavits that affirmed their belief that his veracity was without question. And the guy was also, which most people don't know if they know about the case, they don't know that he was actually a law enforcement official, and because of the uproar of his claim, just within days he had to sort of step down from being a law enforcement official. And I really, myself and David Perkins really dug into this, and we found the article that Jerry quoted, claiming that this is where he did a mea culpa and said, yeah, I was, I was part of, it was a hoax. Well, it wasn't.
Chris, let me interrupt here because the audience may not know what we're talking about. Back in April of 1897, Alexander Hamilton, as you mentioned, was a farmer in Kansas, and he claimed one night he was awakened by a noise out in his corral.
It was broad daylight.
Okay, still could have been awakened. The cow was lifted up by a rope into this airship type thing, and it disappeared. And later they found the carcass of the cow mutilated in a field some distance away. And this is the story that Alexander Hamilton was telling around. And this was the time when there were great many stories of great airship flying around the United States,
right,
in March and April of 1897. So now you're saying that Jerry found an article in a newspaper that suggested it was a lie, and you're thinking that was a mea culpa generated because of his positions in the community.
He really got. How about I put this? I guess it appears that he really got slimed by the event and by his reporting it. And by the time that the newspapers got done with him, he really was upset. And his mea culpa was, oh yeah, I must have seen an ant climbing up, a hair into the sky. I forget what it was climbing up into, but he made some ridiculous statement, which obviously was. Was his attempt to deflect the onus of being this, person who made such an incredible claim. But I cover it painstakingly in the book, and from what I can tell, Jerry said, yeah, his I think it was his daughter or
Yes.
or somebody claimed that, oh yeah, I remember that. It was all a hoax and stuff. Well, she was only 2 years old when supposedly she, you know, witnessed this whole event unfold. And you know, I don't know how much you remember from when you were 2 years old. I don't remember anything. So yeah, there's just a lot of wonkiness, for lack of a better term, surrounding Jerry's assertion. And I just beg to differ with him because I checked all the quotes that he had, and they all lead me to the conclusion that this guy was a pillar of the community. He was one of the founding members of the county in Kansas, and 12 people, the main important people in the community, all signed and notarized affidavits attesting to his honesty. So, you know, I don't know. You have to read all my. I mean, I dug on this one for a long time, and I'm not saying that it happened. I'm just saying that Jerry Clark did us all a disservice by dissing the guy by saying he was lying.
Well, let me ask you a question. Did you come across an article in the Atchison County Mail on, I think it's May 7th, 1897, that Eddie Bullard turned up?
But off the top of my head, that doesn't ring a bell.
Well, that's another one where I think where Jerry got the idea that it was a hoax. Eddie Bullard found that, and he published it in his book on UFOs as well. I just found that kind of interesting that Eddie Bullard had done that. And you mentioned the daughter that said it was a hoax, and while she may not have witnessed the event in 1897, it certainly could have been part of family discussions later on that she would have remembered about this event, because, as you say, it became a big deal.
It really did.
So
Yeah,
it may
it
have been part of family lore. So
Right.
I just
You know, again, it's an apocryphal account. I don't pretend to know the answer to these historical cases. I chase them down just like you do, and you know, I look for you know, the type of evidence that might suggest that something has, you know, some validity to it. The one thing I do is if I go out on a case, which I don't. I'm kind of retired from field work. My least favorite thing in life is to be called up to go investigate a dead necrotic cow. It's not fun. And but that having said that, I do feel that, you know, my years and years of work out in the field and working with law enforcement, working with veterinary pathologists, working with diagnostic labs, biophysicists, law enforcement, that, you know, I'll stand behind the results of my work with, you know, that I do in person, and with the types of experts that you need to really rely on.
Well, if I might return to 1897 just briefly here, I don't know how familiar you are with the great airship phenomenon from that time frame.
Quite familiar.
But the vast majority of those cases turned out to be hoaxes.
Yeah. There were headline producing stories that got people to buy papers. Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, so that may have fit into that category. And I know Jerry Clark and I have argued about this point as well, that he thinks there was some good, solid cases from 1896 that kind of sparked this whole thing. And I think that the whole thing was sparked by a hoax. So he and I disagree on that. So apparently you and I disagree, have disagreed with Jerry on various cases. Is where I was going with that for some reason. I wanted to talk to you briefly about the Randle report. He was a FBI agent hired by the state of New Mexico to investigate cattle mutilations. And I know you mentioned it briefly in the book. And I communicated with Randle a number of times, and he sent me a copy of his report free of charge, and he FedExed it to me. I thought that was awfully generous at the time. we're going to have to take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the Randle report. When we talk about Dan Kagan and Ian Summers' book, Mute Evidence, which is another examination of cattle mutilations from, I guess, a skeptical point of view. And I'll give Chris an opportunity to respond to some of the things learned there. I do want to say that if you've got a chance, take a look at Understanding Roswell. I've gotten a number of reviews, feedback on that book, and it seems to have, I guess, inspired some people. I'm kind of surprised because the tone wasn't one of these rah, yeah, it's all alien type thing. It was kind of an examination of the facts from a dispassionate point of view. But it seems to be getting some very positive feedback from people, and I'm kind of pleased with that. So you get a chance to take a look at that. My blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and we'll chat about that maybe in a little while. The other thing we should mention is Chris O'Brien's book is Stalking the Herd, and like I said, he sent me a copy of it, and it is kind of an interesting read. Whether you believe in cattle mutilations or not, it's an interesting read. And his website is ourstrangeplanet.com. Our Strange Planet, all one word, all lowercase, and there's additional information there and places you can go to get additional information about UFOs and cattle mutilations. And I said, when we come back, we'll talk about Randle, and I want to talk about the helicopter aspect of this as well. So we will be back right after this, so please stick around. And we are back, surprisingly. I didn't get the normal thing to come back to. So I'm here with Chris O'Brien. We're talking about cattle mutilations. And when I went away, I mentioned the Randle report. But I know you wanted to talk about the helicopter aspect of this as well. And I'm going to give you pick your topic here. Where would you like to go?
Well, I find it very interesting that the work of Tom Adams should be, I think, spoken about first. He really did an amazing job documenting media reports, law enforcement reports during the 70s of unexplained livestock deaths, which I prefer to use the term instead of mutilations. And he also published a really curious compendium, kind of like a booklet, basically, that was a listing of around 300 documented cases of helicopters being sighted in and around mutilation sites. And I personally have seen several of these mysterious helicopters that tend to flock around mutilation sites mostly after these cases are reported, or they're perpetrated and then reported. And if it was all just hysteria, mass hallucination, ranchers not knowing what they're looking at, which I find very difficult to believe, then why the interest in possibly, some quasi-governmental organization is showing an interest in these sites? Now, every type of helicopter, it's not all black helicopters. There's every color of the rainbow. I personally saw a yellow helicopter, which was quite instrumental in kind of hooking the big tuna there. I got a major wake-up call when I had my helicopter experience while investigating my very first case. So, I feel that there's a connection there. I think that these things are real. They're 20% of them, at least in my case, I believe are real. And I think that there's some group, possibly the government, possibly the CDC, maybe, something to do with cattle are really, really valued in the agricultural
Well, let me
market,
ask you a question. Don't a lot of ranchers own helicopters?
No.
I know Tom Adams in his treatise, which you sent me, had talked to the public affairs officer is in Fort Carson, Colorado.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we don't fly off the reservation. We don't do these sorts of things. And I'm thinking, as a former Army helicopter pilot who was flying with the National Guard in that time frame, I noticed he didn't talk to anybody in the National Guard. And the National Guard units are a little bit looser on that. We had an incident where we were practicing formation flying, and one of the aircraft says, you're not going to believe this, we're taking fire. And some farmer was down there shooting at us with a shotgun.
Yeah.
And my response was, yeah, right. That's kind of my response to a shotgun. And I'm thinking, should we return fire for fire received? We would have him outgunned, I'm pretty sure. But there was, I don't know if we ever got called for being one of these black helicopters. You know, the Army helicopters were painted dark green and the numbers were black, so they were very hard to see.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. So I just wonder if some of that, those incidents are pretty much explainable in that realm. I know we were a little bit, we needed to get some flight time. Gary Gogger and I, a friend of mine, and we were given a helicopter by the Iowa National Guard to fly down to Fort Leonard Wood to make a PX run. It was just a cross-country mission type training mission and that sort of thing. And so, the fact that the active duty forces might have had a little bit stricter handle on their aircraft than we did, the National Guard, is one thing. The other thing is when I was at Fort Walters, to get our 4 hours of flight time, we were allowed to check out the helicopters and go off on whatever we wanted to do. And I know one time we flew into Love Field in Dallas, and we got back, and somebody in operations was all outraged that we had done that. And they said, "Why, the tower didn't care," and just steered us across the runways, and we landed and had a good time at Love Field. So I'm just wondering if some of that isn't really an overreaction on the part of, we're looking for any helicopter that might have been in an area we didn't expect it to be in, as opposed to something really involved in camera relations.
Yeah, I'm sure that some of the sightings were of the mundane variety, as you described, but there's been too many cases that, kind of counter that. And
have you ever tracked anybody, any aircraft back to the source? Where it came from?
They tried to do that in Elbert and the counties on the north, what would be the northeastern side of Colorado. There were many attempts actually to try to track these helicopters down by law enforcement in planes, law enforcement on the ground, and they were never successful. They also tried to track down Big Mama, which is a huge UFO that was seen disgorging smaller objects out of it. And it became so, I guess, popular. They actually named the reoccurring UFO about Big Mama. So, unless you've got somebody on the tarmac waiting to go, it's going to be very difficult for you to get mustered quickly enough to follow, a helicopter. Or in some cases, UFOs. And I'm, again, all I can do is I just report the facts, and I take law enforcement and county officials and brand inspectors. I take their opinions, to heart, because these guys are professionals. They know what they're doing, they know what they're looking at, and they wouldn't be passing along information unless they believed it to be so.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left, and you kind of led us into the professionals. What do you make of the Randle report? He was the FBI agent commissioned to study counter mutilations in New Mexico.
As soon as he started his 6 months of investigation in, I think, January 1980, cattle mutilations ceased in New Mexico and picked up really dramatically in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and some in British Columbia. And Lynn Lauber of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police made a comment when he was asked about the Rommel report. And he says, well, if he came up with the results that this is nothing but scavenger action, he should take a look at some of our cases, because we can't do that. And I find it very interesting that there really are no reports of cattle mutilations in New Mexico, which is where he was looking from about the middle of 79 all the way through 81. And so, careful what you wish for. He didn't even get out of the car. I mean, he would sit upwind of the case. He saw one or two, and then he said, I don't want to deal with this. And he would allow his underlings to go ahead and do the actual investigations. And then he had already, like Ed Condon and the Condon report, he had already passed judgment on the subject he was investigating before he even began.
Well, let me interrupt here because we're just about out of time. So the final question would be, what do you think is going on with the cattle mutilations? Quickly.
I think that the beef industry and the government is incredibly nervous about the potential outbreak of mad cow disease in the food chain. And like Colm Kelleher in his book Brain Trust, which I would really advise you reading, he slam dunks that particular scenario convincingly. I mean, the guy's he was the administrator of a $20 million OSAP program with Bigelow Aerospace and the rest of it, which gets into a whole nother show if you want to do it later. But his book Brain Trust, I really recommend it to anybody that's interested in this phenomenon. So he lays out a perfect case.
Your opinion then is it's some kind of a government research project?
Maybe. It could be big beef. The beef industry is the largest income producing sector of agribusiness. And 70 to 80% of the family mom and pop ranches that existed back in the 70s are gone. And they've been taken over by very large ranching concerns. And the cattle are being, obviously they're in these huge feedlots. We've never had a case in a feedlot.
Chris, we're out of time. I'm sorry.
we got to do it again. I'm sorry I had a problem getting on earlier.
That's okay. We handled it. We got through it. So
right.
Thank you very much.
Kevin, thank you for your service. And man, I'll tell you, I have been a fan of yours for many years and continue to be.
I'm a fan of yours. The website is OurStrangePlanet.com, and the latest book is Stalking the Herd. And I recommend Stalking the Herd if you want to get a somewhat dispassionate look at the cattle mutilations. Thank you very much, Chris. Next week with luck, I'll have William Puckett. We'll be talking about trends in the UFO sightings and where things are going and that sort of thing, which is, I think, of interest in today's environment. We'll stay away from cattle mutilations for a while on that. Once again, my latest book is Understanding Roswell. I also would ask you to pick up Levelland, because I think that's going to open your eyes on some of the investigations that the Air Force did into the UFO phenomena, especially in the early or late 1950s, that sort of thing. As I say, I'll be back next week with William Puckett. We will be talking about UFOs. Other than that, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you later.